Thank you very much. Just as I was listening to you, it occurred to me that I'm now in the country where one of the most significant and dramatic leaks, truth-telling, whistleblowing that I've ever seen occurred in 2003, just before the invasion, the aggression against Iraq. And that was Catherine Gunn at GCHQ, the equivalent to our National Security Agency, found on her computer actually indication, actually request, an operational request from the NSA, from a named person at the National Security Agency, for the GCHQ to tap the home and office phones of every member of the Security Council prior to the debate and voting on authorization of what would, without that authorization, be a clear-cut crime against international crime, and a war of aggression against the UN Council and Charter. And it occurs to me, listening to you, what was that purpose then that she was exposing? The purpose was to get the information with which they could be manipulated, be blackmailed in effect from their anything they might find on their home known phones and everything else, to get them to vote in favor of the attack on Iraq, whose consequences in terms of our national security, I don't need to go into now, right? Was a disaster from every point of view. Had nothing then to do with protecting us from any attack, but on the contrary, to recruiting ultimately for ISIS. Without that attack, no ISIS now that we're hearing about right now. So the judgment of the officials of your government here in England and my government in the United States is to be measured, as to how much benefit of the doubt they should get on their judgment and their responsibility by that very occurrence. Well, her hope was that by giving that to the observer, I think it was, at that point, which she did, amazingly. She saw that. I don't know of another whistleblower who sort of acted for the first time so decisively and so importantly. And her hope was that by showing that this vote was to be achieved by what amounted to blackmail, might prevent the war. And how to do that? Because the initial advice of Goldsmith, the Attorney General here, was to Blair, was that without that vote, it would be clear-cut crime against the peace and aggression. So she hoped, and since Blair had said earlier that he would not go into Iraq, some of you may remember this and some not probably, he would not go into Iraq without that support from the UN, which he ultimately did anyway. But the hope was then that he would obey that decision, that he would obey international law and the UN Charter on this, and not go without clear-cut authorization of from the Security Council, that they might avert what she saw was clearly an illegal war to be achieved by illegal means, basically. Well, the effect of that revelation, which put her on trial, was to did not prevent the war, actually, because Blair in the end followed the U.S., who certainly wasn't feeling that compulsion about requiring the vote, although the U.S. had been trying to get it up till that point. But it did prevent the Security Council from voting. A number of members on that had experienced CIA manipulation of an enormous sort, coercive sort over the years, and were not about to vote in favor of a resolution that was clearly subject to that manipulation. So they had to go again ahead without that legitimation, which was worthwhile, worth her efforts, and she was prepared to go to prison for it. In the end, by the way, the case was dropped just when it became clear that Elizabeth Wilmshurst, Foreign Service officer who had highest person dealing with legal matters there, was going to testify in her trial and would testify that the war was illegal, as well as the methods. So there was there's an actual test of what this was to be used for. The argument that mass surveillance has kept us and will keep us and is necessary in order to protect us from the risk of terrorism has as much basis in reality and experience as the argument that torture is necessary and has had that effect, which is to say zero, simply zero. When the NSA claimed that there had been, first of all, there had been some 57 terrorist attacks that had been prevented by this mass warrantless surveillance. He was pressed by a couple of senators, and for once ultimately had to come up with an answer. They reduced the number down finally to 1, not 57. And the 1 was that they had discovered by this mass surveillance an $8,000 payment by someone, I think a taxi driver in the Midwest, to an alleged group associated with terrorism and so forth. Not a very hardy bulwark against terrorism force. The truth is, all of this dance in the U.S. about the risk of letting the Patriot Act expire and thus supposedly losing losing the mass surveillance we were doing, the risk of doing that even for a day or two is actually is drama to convey the thought we in the government believe that it is only that, nothing else. That's the parachute over your head. That's the only thing that's protecting you from an imminent terrorist attack. When in fact, a dozen years of this surveillance have had no such effect whatever. In fact, have diverted resources and attention from much more effective means. When they say, if and when there is another terrorist attack, we will blame those of you who have not given us the power of surveillance. For once they're telling the truth. They will blame such people. And that threat, that danger is enough to keep journalists and congresspeople and members of parliament for fear of facing that blame, keeping them to give them whatever they want so that the government can't blame them. They've actually given them everything they want. Well, I have a secret for them that I will convey right now. When the terrorist attack occurs, they will blame Parliament, and they will blame the journalists, and they will blame the dissenters, whatever they've done before. Simply giving them everything they asked for will not protect them from blame. So I think they really should erase that consideration, but they won't. The fear of being called weak, cowardly, unmanly, weak on terrorism, weak on communism, has kept members of the party that I've been with most of my life, the Democratic Party, afraid of voting against appropriations in Vietnam, in Iraq, in other cases. Many people have died for fear of legislators being called names during this. And to avoid that fear, that security of their own jobs and so forth, they're willing to send people to die, and they're willing to tear up constitutional freedoms of all sorts. It is up to us basically to demand, to put another kind of fear in them that they will lose their jobs if they don't live up to their responsibilities to protect our freedom and to protect us in more effective ways that are compatible with democracy.